The Meta Quest's graphics feel like something out of the PS2 era sometimes, but it doesn't always have to be that way. We'll be going over what the Quest platform is capable of today, what we've got to watch out for while developing for it, and what we can do to work around the limitations that it has in the process. Hello virtual dreamers, Gregory here. I want to get one thing straight here right off the bat. The Quest and the Quest 2 are not actually running PS2 era hardware or graphics tech. The Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 of the Quest 1 and the XR2 of the Quest 2 are basically 1,000 times more powerful than what the PS2 offered, and have more in common with the outgoing PlayStation 4 than they do the GameCube contemporary. The main reason graphics aren't on the same caliber as the PS4, despite the commonality, is the sheer rendering demands of virtual reality. The PS4 got away with running at 1080p and 30 frames per second in some of its most major titles. By comparison, the Quest 2 has to do that, but times 2 in resolution, times 2 for each eye, at a minimum of times 2.4 in frame rate for even the weakest games. Throw in that the chips aren't even using their full power out of consideration for heat and battery life, and we're lucky to have landed in the between PS2 and PS3 era levels of graphics that we have. The bright side here, of course, is that we're doing all that extra work for the sake of enjoying the visual wonders that only VR can provide to us. And hey, while all that pixel work from before is definitely taxing on how many features we can use at once, it doesn't necessarily do the same thing to the kinds of features we can use. Physically based rendering, real-time lighting, real-time shadows, even global illumination approximations are technically able to run on the hardware thanks to its use of modern graphics APIs. Any developer who properly leverages the features essentially has all the way up to the most recent generations of graphics toolsets in order to produce wonderful visuals for the platforms. Just look at what was accomplished in The Walking Dead, Saints and Sinners, Red Matter, The Climb 2, and Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge to see what can be done. By all means, if you have a vision, there should be a way for you to cram it onto the Quest platforms. Operative word being cram. Game development is not to the point where everything truly just works, no matter what Unity or Epic try to say. We've still got to use smoke and mirrors to make magic happen here, and I must therefore acknowledge that standalone VR platforms don't make the illusion crafting process any easier. While I did mention that we have access to features like physically based rendering, real-time lighting, and real-time shadows on mobile, that does not mean that we should always use them. We'll get far better performance by going back to a lot of the rendering techniques and optimizations that made the PS2 and PS3 eras of titles shine. If you're a developer, consider the following. Bake lighting into objects whenever possible. Only use real-time lighting when it's absolutely necessary, preferably only even one at a given moment. Minimize polygon counts on screen to lessen the load on your GPU. We're talking about a few 100,000 or so on the Quest 1. Lower your draw calls by using as few materials as possible, and atlas your textures whenever you can. Use smaller areas and rooms to better leverage occlusion culling. And as a cute final little tip, don't try to run real-time global illumination on your Quest, even as an approximation. As you can all imagine, all of the restrictions that exist on Quest platforms make our game development sleight of hand tricks much harder to use, and thus make it difficult to create software to the same graphical standards that many of us have grown accustomed to. If things were truly easy, we'd probably have games like Asgard's Wrath, Resident Evil 7, and Grand Theft Auto 5 on the Quest by now. Instead, we're stuck making do with Resident Evil 4 and the promise of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas instead. Feel free to take that PS2 on Gen 8 tech steroids reality for what you will, my dear viewer. As far as I'm concerned, however, I loved the PS2 era of gaming. Generation 6 is host to some of the most beloved games of all time, many of which still hold up to this day and serve as reminders to everyone that graphics aren't everything, and that art and good game design can trump all when it comes to getting enjoyment from games. If we can't have too many lights, we'll just have to make sure the ones that we do have serve a strong purpose. Even if real-time shadows are tough, we can still implement them if we're mindful to not use too many cascades and overall just try to keep them as close to the player as we can. Heck, the Quest 2 even makes it a lot easier to do just that. Regarding polygon counts, these actually haven't been a big barrier for development for a long while now, but we do have to keep our best practices in mind. Properly decimate any polygons that aren't necessary towards keeping your silhouette, make use of LOD groups to assure only as many polygons as necessary are being used at a given time, and sharing of materials will go a long way to minimizing the impact of your polygon count on performance or your art direction. Speaking of which, consider using more stylized art directions overall, as they naturally lend themselves towards suspension of disbelief thanks in part to being so different from our expectations. Kingdom Hearts, Wind Waker, Okami, Dragon Quest VIII, these are each games that hold up very well thanks in large part due to their stylized art directions, which conveniently work just as well or better in VR 3D than they do in pancake form. And of course, this isn't to say that titles like Boneworks and Asgard's Wrath aren't on Quest solely due to their graphical demands, but it's worth noting that with enough cutbacks and adjustments, there is very little that can't be done, even on the Quest 1, let alone the Quest 2. A lot of this is really more a matter of lacking will than it is lacking a way. Ultimately, visual fidelity on Quest and Quest 2 is primarily going to be a balancing act between systemic ambition and performance. That's not really all that different to the way things are on other platforms as is, but this is a consideration that is all the more important in these times where indie development seems to be the main content creating force for the medium. I am certain that visually stunning games can be made for these platforms, but we must be mindful that a lot of game art nowadays is much more dependent on time and money available to the game's art team than it necessarily is on the graphical technology of the platform. It's a shame then that getting more money isn't the kind of problem that optimizing coder settings can solve. Thank you very much for watching my video, my fellow virtual dreamers. For more on my game dev journey, follow me on Twitter @MarkystalVR, since I'm posting regular updates on how things are progressing on there. Till next time, my fellow adventurers and dreamers, this has been Gregory, logging out.